Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never met me before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. And I just like to put a little bit of a wish for a happy 4th of July to all the Americans. You know, I was watching a couple of programs today on the Constitution, and I find it very admirable about a lot of aspects of that Constitution that gives rights to the everyday man, especially when it comes to things like religious ideas and spiritual ideas and being able to have a voice, this free speech. You know, in lots of countries, they shut it down, over the course of the Iran war and everything. They shut that communication down because they don't want that network of naysay or, bad influence go out to the world. Like North Korea, we all have no idea what's going on with North Korea except for those spy drones and stuff that go on. But what about the people who live in North Korea, right? That they don't get to understand and appreciate all kinds. Now, if you've hung out with me for any length of time, hello, Tammy. Hello, dear. If you've hung out with me for any length of time, you know I'm a true believer that this world needs to be full of all kinds, that it takes all kinds to make the world. And lots of times we reject what is not like ourselves. And that's the truth. But it's a feeling that we have, you know, and it's supposed to work that way in being able to use our intuitions and paying attention to mannerisms and the undertones and the intent in the conversation or the directives, right? That we get to be able to judge for ourselves, right? Understanding that the person you're standing next to is not even going to see that. And if you were to vocalize that, well, you would have a little group going against you. I don't know if you've ever had that situation, Tammy. For myself, in my hypervigilance, in those gifts that I've received, right? I didn't ask for them, but they ended up in my lap. And in what I'm doing now, and in the course of my life, I have utilized those gifts because I've earned those badges, right? I've earned those badges. But I can only judge for myself. I can't, you know, have my perspective laid out on somebody else and say this is the truth. Everybody, like that beautiful, right, constitution that gives people that right for free speech in the United States, that everybody can voice and live their own opinion, but without being malicious about it, not putting even ourselves in a scary situation where you're the only one with that perspective and you voice it, and then you have like 20 people crawling down your throat. That happened so many times in growing up, and it didn't matter if it was the truth, right? Now you probably get the gist. I was a little bit of a truth teller. I didn't get it, right? My dad brought us up with free choice, only within the privacy of our own home and in our families' lives. I was not supposed to discuss that, but outside of that, right? I had free reign, and lots of times I would put my foot in my mouth, right? And it didn't matter if it was a truth. Sometimes, if it was a truth, it would be even a worse outcome for me than if it was just an outright lie, you know? And I believe that it probably, I'd have to say well into my adulthood before, you know, after a while, I guess I learned it was probably a little bit more comfortable to keep it zipped, that I'd probably get myself in less situations where I might be demoralized or hurt, right? By saying the truth. Or maybe it was in that, in sticking my foot in my mouth and paying that price of being designated as the outcast, or not being welcomed, or people were uncomfortable with me, that I found myself alone, right? That I would be rejected in those friendships, in those outings, those group settings, right? That after a while, I got to learn that it was probably, right, better for me if I did keep it zipped. And that was hard sometimes, especially in my own defense of myself, because, we rub each other uncomfortably all the time, don't we? And, and as sensitives, we pick things up. We pick up those unkindnesses, not literally pick them up and hold them, but we do that. We do that too because people expect us to hold their crap, right? But at the same time, when you are highly sensitive, you pick up on, well, again, like I said, we utilize those gifts, those badges that we've earned in life, and we recognize where it's safe and where it's unsafe. We understand a truth from a lie, or a little bit of an exaggeration, or self defense, even the kindness and the appreciation and the love. And that was a big thing for me because, when I grew up, people would treat me. I told that story about Beverly Edwards, right? People were consistently treating me like they didn't like me. But sometimes I could really feel their care and their caregiving for me, even though on the outside it was perceived as something else. I could always feel the inside, right? That's the idea. I explore the inside and the outside. But, it was curious because I actually would have to draw friendships into me. Sometimes it was in that people pleasing that quite often worked for me, but I would give a little bit of something of myself away when I did that. And I always wanted to be appreciated for myself, for what I had to contribute as a friend or a girlfriend or a wife or a confidant or a boss, right? And you guys know of all those jobs that I've had, I always worked as fast as I could to get to that supervisory or manager position, just because, right, of that breath on the back of the neck and having to answer to people, again, for this reason that we have those sensitivities, that we can pick these things up And we are not able to express them because it's not safe, right? That our jobs depend on it, or this one person is only recognizable in their truth by me and not by anybody else, right? So if I said anything, that I would end up having all their allies, and they call them flying monkeys, right? Their little go tos and those I second that. And it would make for an uncomfortable situation for me, you know, and it was uncomfortable on a day to day to start with, whether I was at home or at school or out and about just doing my own thing. It was always picked up, but it was picked up because that was what I was emitting, right? Not admitting, but emitting, because it's that hypervigilance, like you're going like this all the time, looking for the dangers, looking for the unkind words, those sticks and stones that, right, that somebody gonna jump up, beat you up, or say something mean or embarrass you. And that was a big thing for me because I was a heavy girl and I was very self conscious in that. And that was an easy thing, especially in the 60s and 70s, that people could utilize as a tool themselves to dig at me. And when people dig at you, it's usually an insecurity in themselves. But I didn't recognize that. You know, it's only been probably no less, well, maybe I'm going to say my mid 20s when I was determined to be myself, to see if I could fit myself into groups where I could be appreciated for the person that I was. Not to say I didn't people please in getting those relationships, but it was nothing that didn't make me smile. It was nothing that, cost me my livelihood, right? We were all spending on each other in order to have our good times, whether it was putting gas in the car to go to the beach, or they wanted to go to the bar and somebody didn't have any money. We were all covering each other in that. But it was all reciprocal. This week this person's broke, next week this person is broke, right? That this person needs help, but this week I need help. And so it was an exchange. And this is where I first picked up this idea of little drummer girl and little drummer boy. Because, right, I loved my friends. I loved the people that I was associated with. They were kind hearted. And in that hypervigilance, I felt safe. I felt like I was home. I felt like I was loved and cared for. I felt like, right, that I was the part of the group, right? And I, what came into my mind, well, it doesn't matter. But but I felt so cared for in those relationships that I was able to let my guard down and let my real self come to the surface. And I was appreciated in that. And not only was I appreciated in that, that same feeling that they gave me, I gave them, because it was permission that they could be themselves too. In saying that, my friends were all bums. Right? I didn't know a lot of people that were up there in their careers besides, my sisters maybe, but you know, most of us in my group, we lived on unemployment. We lived the good life, but in a different way. Our abundance was different. It wasn't wrapped around expensive cars. I was the queen of beaters. I was definitely the queen of beaters. But luckily, I had friends who loved to tinker around with cars, and right, I always kept my cars running so many years longer than when they really should have been on the road. But that sense of abundance for us were those relationships that we created in those groups that we had. We had a lot of fun. But I was talking about it last week that, if I had that chance to do it again, I would appreciate, being a good citizen for the city I live in, the province I live in, the federal government, that, I didn't really pull my own. But the life I led was suitable for a system that was looking for a way to calm itself. And I was within a group that allowed me to be myself, that calmed my system down. Very rarely was it stirred up or frightened. And if I was frightened, it was like a pack of wolves, right? You said something mean to me, it was just like, and that would be it, right? And so it was a safe place for me to be, but we were not very responsible. And that's the truth. We are one of the people that we surround ourselves with. And that was something that I learned very early when I first started waking up to some of these ideas. And it's so true because being that person who's able to go back into their own lives and reflect in my experiences, right? That I could clearly see it only for the fact of where I was. I probably had, in my crew, probably the best jobs, but it was only for the fact that, I was so hyper vigilant. I didn't want people to be mean to me, that I was working myself to the bone and I was raising myself up in the positions of the companies I worked for only for the fact that I didn't want people on me, right? So, so it makes sense that I wouldn't excel, right? Always wished, always dreamed. I was a hard worker, right? And bosses appreciated that, right? Because I was that prime example of what the bosses wanted. I always prided myself on being that employee that any owner would want to just have for themselves in their company forever. I did, but it wasn't really fair to me because there were lots of times, like I said, people I was closest to, they were bums, right? Lovable bums, right? But bums nonetheless, not contributing, all relying on the resources of what the government could afford to them or what their friends could afford to part with so that they could have the life that they wanted. None of them wanted to be working for the man, which says right there that most of us had that in mentality of highly sensitives as empaths. At the time, we weren't talking about that. We didn't understand these terminologies in any way. But again, putting myself back there, like I could see them, I could see them all. I went, oh my goodness, that's how we found each other. That's why we cared so much for each other because we gave each other what we needed, right? For our own calming of our systems. Not to say there weren't stinkers in that group too, because we have a tendency to be attracted to the controllers, to the to the narcissists, right? Because that's what we're used to growing up in our life. And we don't get really anything done unless we have that directive, right? Because we are the couch and the remote control generation. We were clubbers, and it was a good life. It was an abundant life, but it wasn't money and fancy cars and fancy homes and vacations. It wasn't anything like that. Our vacations were partying on Friday night at somebody's house, or going camping, or fishing, or going to the beach, right? Having a barbecue out behind somebody's backyard. And doesn't that sound amazing? To me, that sounds amazing, right? It sounds comfortable. It sounds safe because that's our comfort zone, right? And I wish I had known that phrase, that we have to get out of our comfort zones, because that's exactly what I needed in my life, right? But I didn't have that directive in any way. And responsibility wasn't high up there on the list. As long as I was getting a paycheck every week and I didn't have somebody yelling at me, I was good, right? Now I'm just looking at my bangs here. I don't know if you guys know the story on my pink bangs, if you've been hanging out with me again for any length of time. Colored bangs have been in my life for decades, right? It was a little trick that I picked up. And because I am an in betweener, right? While I used to be easily triggered in that, coming from two extremes, right? In my family, that, I had a little bit of a hybrid of two different kinds. And so I would get myself in situations quite often when somebody would think they could pull one over on me or come at me, and I would have to go in defense, and all my hairs would stand up, and I would just like, right? And if you gave it to me, my motto was, I'm giving it back to you, and you're going to get it 10 times worse than what you gave to me. Right? I could easily put somebody down just in my voice, right? And I would shock people because I had this demeanor of meekness, right? And that can be picked out of a crowd so easily in an instant. And that's why they take advantage of our kindnesses, right? Of our hearts. And thinking that we're not going to do anything if they're mean to us in any way, or they're unfair to us in any way, that we're just going to take it. But being that person that I was, right? And sticking her foot in her mouth every once in a while, I had a hard time with that. Even as an adult, I had a hard time with that. But what I found is when I colored my bangs, all I do is just color my bangs, right? That when I colored my bangs, people would always give me 30 seconds, right? Before they made their decision as to whether to come at me. Because those pink bangs are not a standard way of expressing yourself, right? Lots of people color their hair all different colors and stuff, but not the sensitives, right? Not usually the sensitives. The sensitives are usually the analyticals, right? They're the ones that maybe might have some emotional, mental, or physical disabilities. They're the hypervigilants who are always looking out for who's going to try and knock them down next. There may be the unattractives, right? The overweights. the loners. But most of these people aren't flamboyant in any way. They're looking to be invisible. They're looking to blend into the crowd as much as they could. That unfortunately wasn't an option for me because I was a big girl, right? And 60s, 70s, 80s, that wasn't the norm. Maybe one or two people in school were that way. It's not like it is now where it is the norm, right? And of course, there are anti bullying campaigns that they have in schools and workplaces now, which wasn't the case when I was growing up. And kudos, we are getting much better at it. But I would find when I colored my bangs, people would leave me alone, right? Cindy's got some personality. I don't know. I don't know if I should say that to her because, yeah, maybe she'll go off on me or something. And it didn't change my persona in any way. I was still the person that I was. And I'm thinking, was that a mask? Was that a mask? Maybe in the beginning it was a mask for me. Now the pink bangs are just a part of who I am. Nobody gives me a second glance because everybody has personality now, even in those minority groups, because they understand too, just like I did, that, right? They might have a few minutes for somebody to get the senses about them before they decide to lay into that person. And you can avert, is that the word? You can avoid, right? Maybe a circumstances that you didn't want to get in. And it served me very, very, very well, right? And yeah, I don't know why I went into that conversation. I have no idea. But I went there. So let's go into the comments because I lost my flow there. Let's come into the comments and see what's going on here. Um, I never forced my opinions or truth on them. I chose my battles and I still do. I try to use wisdom and knowledge when I speak. Wisdom and knowledge. Um, I tend to work on the emotions when I have interactions with people. You know, again, I'm feeling out people in introductions and, being highly sensitive. I do want people to like me, right? To appreciate me for the person that I am. Maybe it's in that little bit of not having that confidence to express my wisdom and my knowledge, right? Maybe a little bit better now, right? But I would have to say, growing up and in my young adulthood, right? I pick my battles too, but I usually worked within the emotions so that people would learn to be kind, right? If you wanted to hang out with us, you had to be kind, you had to be understanding, right? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Yeah, so I worked in probably because I didn't think I was knowledgeable. Probably nobody wanted to hear what I had to say outside of my group, but I never felt that I was had wisdom and knowledge. That was my sister's Tracy's forte. She was the smart one. She was the one who had the answers, and if she didn't have the answers, she was the smartest one to resource them, and not only resource them, but to manifest them into reality Yeah, she was a pretty amazing lady like that. She was an executive salesperson for a big office furniture company, and she was one of the best salesmen in all of North America. She won so many awards. She used to get prizes and vacations and all kinds of things because she was so good. And it made her a millionaire, right? She worked hard for that money, and she created a magnificent life where, she had the fancy cars, a fancy house, the vacations. But I don't believe outside of those activities like the backyard barbecues and going to the movie and going out for dinner, right? That those abundant adventures that I was living was a totally different world than what she was living. But we were sisters. So every once in a while, we would partake in each other's lives and have those experiences, right? Because even though I hung out with a different crowd with a different mentality, I worked within organizations where I was management, I was supervisor, I was running business. I had to be professional, and I was in the presence of professionals and in meetings with suits and stuff. So I became multi-diverse in the people that I associated with and interacted with. But I would suspect a lot of them, because my insecurity of not feeling that anybody was interested in what I had to say. They had to do what I said because I was a supervisor or manager, but I didn't think anybody really thought of me as having wisdom and knowledge, right? Um, like I said, we grow, right? We have so many transformations during the course of our lives. I'm not sure if I feel that way anymore. Um, but yeah, I it was always emotions for me because I was always trying to avoid the uncomfortable feedback in other people's emotions because I could feel the emotions, right? That was easier for me to maneuver than to try to express how smart I was or how much wisdom I was in. And if you guys hang out with me, you guys know I'm pretty layman here because the topics that I talk about, right? These are intellectual topics. You wouldn't know it by the way that we're having a conversation. But if I didn't have these conversations the way that I'm having them, these lessons might not be able to be absorbed, right, by anybody because these are topics that are talked about in different groups, right? And because we are who we rub ourselves up against, who we surround ourselves with, not all of us are comfortable in bouncing around in these groups that we're unfamiliar with. Why? Because we're unfamiliar, and what's unfamiliar is uncomfortable. And because I'm familiar, right, because of the dynamic relationships that I have had my entire life, that 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 it's comfortable for me, and also, right, having that mentality that I want to be myself, that I want to be genuine in my conversations, that this is my channel, my brand, and so I can be that. I'm not, right? I don't have to be that professional, right? I don't have to be fancy hairdo, this much makeup, and be anything except who I am. And that suits me and it represents the lessons that I want to uphold and live by and share, right? So that we can all better get along. It takes all kinds to make the world. It really does take all kinds to make the world. And to get back to what started the conversation with the Constitution being 4th of July, right? That I kind of appreciate how the Americans, their citizens, are allowed to have their voice, and it's and not only have a voice, but that freedom of religion, wherein many other countries, right, that's limited, and that's still looked down upon because people don't like what's different. And if nothing else, the Americans are different, aren't they? So, yeah, so happy 4th of July. That's where that all came from. Happy 4th of July. Um, I always tried to be a friend to all people, people who were normal and people who were handicapped, people of different cultures and races too. I always had people wanting to hang around me too. And that's why, because they sense that non judgmental in you. They sense the kindness and the caring, right? And you make them feel like home, Tammy, right? That's a gift. That's truly, truly a gift to have. And it probably served you very well because when you did get yourself in a situation where people weren't treating you well because they picked up on somebody or picked up on something in you and they were having a bad day and they decided to take it out on you, it made it possible that possibly you had people in your ring too, right? And that might have helped you along in other people realizing, oh, Tammy's got her own wolf pack. Right? I have noticed people get more from me than they do to want to do something for me or give me or do for me. Yeah, I'm a believer you get what you give. And if you're not getting, right, you're either around the wrong people, you're with the takers, right? And who wants to be around the takers, especially if you don't have much to give. And not only that, in that you get what you give, what do you get from that, right? I have a problem with just being around the takers. And we don't always have stuff to give, right? You give what you can give, right? In that little girl, little drummer boy attitude that we should all have because it's just a recognition there's no excuses for not being able to help and care for others in need, that right, a lot of things going on in this world that we can do that doesn't cost us our resources, and that's the truth, right? But yeah, it's sad when we're in a situation where we're just around the takers and not the givers. Thank you everybody for the thumbs up. It's much appreciated, dear. Oh, Eugene's here. Hello, Eugene. Like you, Cindy, I've always been a genuine person. Yeah, it gets us into trouble every once in a while. We also will rub the wrong people wrong because, not everybody appreciates the genuine because they're in a situation where they're unable to be themselves, to be genuine. And sometimes people can be resentful of that, right? And then that's when you find that you can be picked on a little bit more or outed in the conversations where you're not welcome to join in. And that's a little bit demoralizing and sad too, because, you know, the sensitives are the most amazing people that these are the people you should want to be around, because when you're down, you will feel so much better. But because of the negative, which goes back to earning those badges of being able to feel people out, to recognize the good from the bad, the kind from the unkind, right? You can go a little bit deeper in that. Say you can see the demons in them, right? Just like these are just not nice people. Why don't anybody else see this? And then, over the course of years, there's no point, and even if you're a truth teller, to even spit anything out, because these people or these beings have got everybody kind of hoodwinked, right? And there are examples in that, but I'm not here to, right, give those examples of these people. But we know who they are, and these are the people that we have to look out for, right? There's a difference between being a narcissist or being an a-hole and being one of these people, because these people are the coercive ones. They're the nasty, go for the jugular. You're giving me a headache. They can't stand to be around us. Like, they literally cannot stand to be around us. Where the a-holes, they don't care, because you're just doing all kindnesses for them. The narcissists, while they love energy, whether it's good energy or bad energy, they'll gobble that stuff up like popcorn. But this other group, your voice will give them a headache, right? Their head will spin. You're constantly getting on their last nerve. They're sneaky. They're always trying to get rid of you. They're always trying to isolate you from anybody that's going to offer a little bit of kindness to you, right? Like we talked about the 3 out of the 10 people. That's that one person, right? That one person out of 10. And they come into our lives, and sometimes we just have to put up with it. Those are the ones that will trigger us because, right, they learn our weaknesses, they learn where we'll snap, and they'll go for those cracks, right? And it's kind of like putting a knife in there and just giving it a little twist until you break, right? And even a highly sensitive and an empath will break at their breaking point. We'll take so much until we can't take no more. And if you have a good mindset, you'll put somebody in their place, right? Make sure they recognize that you know what they did and say it loud enough so that everybody else knows. Right? Or you have to collect a little bit of evidence along the way so that you have that backup of explanation. If somebody would say, "Oh, but Jane is such a sweetheart. She goes to church every Sunday. She's a great community leader. She's a great employee." Maybe to a few, right? But not to all. It's not consistent. It's right. And that's the gift of the highly sensitive and the empath, is that we can feel that. We feel intent. We know when somebody's passing off a snide as a compliment, right? Or is actually digging at you to try and steer you in a direction. And, unkindnesses have always irked me, only because I've lived my life in the experiences of unkindnesses. And a lot of those unkindnesses, right? I just had to smile through it, right? And listen to my parents' advice and turning the other cheek until I couldn't turn the other cheek anymore. Wear the pink bangs, to let them know I got some personality. You keep digging at me. Eventually, I'm just going to, you're going to get it. um, Tabby says, well, some people in the United States and government are trying to take away some people's rights and religions and voices, even nowadays. But with that Constitution, right? Try and take that Constitution away from the American public. Try. Oh my goodness. There would be civil war within 24 hours, guaranteed, right? Guaranteed. So, whatever the government does in that way, right? It's that idea, you know, that you can vote in whoever you want to, but the small man will always keep them accountable, right? Yeah. And if it wasn't for that constitution, I couldn't imagine, right? The rights or the non-rights the American public would have. But I do appreciate. I was watching a couple of shows today on the Constitution, and I found it very interesting, right? Did you know that picture? There's a famous picture of all the congressmen and all the leaders who signed the Constitution. You know which picture I'm talking about, Tammy? I'm sure you do. It's like a picture, and everybody's like in a big, what is it, like courthouse or something, and it's in like the 1700s, and they're all in different positions sitting in the chairs, and and that picture is not true, right? They kind of made it to represent a lot of the people. Now the people that were recognizable and famous, they were able by memory to paint them into that picture, but a lot of those people are not relevant in that picture. It came from an artist, a rendition, right? Have to say, part of his imagination, right? They weren't all in that picture. And I found that out today. And I thought that was interesting because I thought, everybody in that picture was a real person, right? George Washington. I'm sure he was in there. I'll have to take another close look at that picture to see if he's in there. But I'm going to assume because he was so famous, right, that he would have been able to be painted just by memory. But interesting, super interesting. Yeah. Okay, you guys. I think that's all I'm gonna divvy out on that. I don't know where that was coming from. I had no topic of discussion when I came here except just to make sure that I wished everybody a happy 4th of July. Do you treat it like a holiday where you like do turkey dinner and stuff like that? Do you treat it like Christmas and Thanksgiving? We have Canada Day. Our Canada Day was actually on July 1st. A good part of the country got shut down for Canada Day just because we've got that El Nino weather going on, right? So there was like crazy thunderstorms and stuff. So there were fireworks and stuff going on because of the crazy weather. But I'd be curious to know if how I know you guys do picnics and fireworks also, but people who don't go to picnics, do you have like a turkey dinner where you invite everybody over for dinner and you make a turkey or right or a big ham or something? Yeah, I'd be curious to know that. I'm not like you we have the same television shows, right? So it's representative of what's going on in the states, and Canadians and the Americans are very much alike. In fact, before they put the border up, like a lot of families had family on the other side of the border, right? And uh, and it's very interesting that over the course of the decades that we have new traditions and new cultural ideas depending on the country. I was watching a lot of those soccer Europeans going back home and how they're all, stashing ranch dressing, and they were amazed by the portions of food that were offered. They were surprised that we didn't charge for a glass of water when you went to a restaurant, but they also didn't like the taste of the water here in the states. But when it comes to the Americans and the Canadians, we are very, very similar in a lot of ways. We don't have that southern twang, but you don't have the Newfie voices either. The Maritimes, right? They have their own voice, and you don't have. Oh, you have Louisiana where they speak French, right? Where we have Quebec here that speak French, but there are still lots of differences. Like your second language in the States is Spanish, and here in Canada, our second language is French, right? So there are lots of differences in that. Well, a lot of people have barbecues and picnics and parades and fireworks, etc. So it's more of a summer celebration than with the backyard parties. People sow different salads and watermelons and go to the parks and eat hot dogs and hamburgers or chicken and baked beans. Some people make pies. Oh, that's awesome, Tabby. That sounds like so much. That sounds like so much fun. Yeah, here in Canada, we like to do the cottages. Like lots of people, they take that opportunity to go to their cottages out at the lake, or in the city. They do the barbecues, right? Um, Fireworks for sure. Uh, Barbecues, not as much barbecues, right? But we do make it a little celebration. Nothing like what the Americans do for the Fourth of July, though. Yeah, it's a big party. Fourth of July is a big party. Thank you for letting me know that, Tammy. Okay, you guys, let's pick a card. Maybe it's pertinent to the conversation, maybe it's not. 54 powerful words. It's a deck that I put together. And this is just, well, I was going to say my prototype I sent to a friend. This was the second deck I did. And then I made a third deck, which isn't used. It's just in a sandwich bag. So when I decide and I got enough money, I'm going to put them into production. The word we have today: enthusiasm is a result of doing what you love. I love this card, right? I love this card. And the enthusiasm of 4th of July, just trying to tie it in there. But, it's what I'm doing here online. I was actually thinking about going back to work. I've got a trip in September that I only got a few $100s put away. It's a very expensive trip, right? And I can manifest and do my affirmations and wish it out the yin yang, right? But it's gotta happen. And so, I was looking for signs, that should I go back to work? And I'm thinking, oh, right, send me a sign, because if I'm not going to be able to afford this trip in September, I'm going back to work for a couple of months so I can raise that money so I can have my beautiful trip in September, right? That's what I love to do. What I do here, I love this. But in the end, that bag at the end of my stick that I carry with me, those are my hopes and my dreams. And the only one that I'm giving myself in the moment as that reward, right, for that movement forward. That's right. That's what you're dangling in front. That's my carrot. You dangle that, and I will just keep trudging along. I'll keep moving, and I'm so grateful that I love what I'm doing because it doesn't even feel like work, right? Like, you know, it doesn't really feel like I deserve a reward for it. But that reward is whether or not I deserve it or not. It's that kindness to myself, right? And yeah, in keeping me going and keeping me optimistic and being enthusiastic in what I'm doing, those gifts to myself, they have to happen, right? It's what brings joy to my life. It's what I'm doing now at one point, you know, I'm dreaming of my life in living in provincial parks with a beautiful little RV or camping trailer and a nice vehicles that I can just be in mother nature all the time and make my outdoor, right? Explore videos, right? And that would truly be, right? What I love to do, right? I really love to do it. I would love what what I'm doing now, be the means to be able to financially secure that dream retirement of mine. And I reward myself, right? But that enthusiasm that I have for what I'm doing here is that stick with the bag at the end, with my goals and my dreams, that I'll be able to bring those things into my life, right? That I explore the inside as well as the outside, right? And it's important for me to be able to immerse myself in both because I love doing both. And it would kind of hurt not being able to explore the outdoors, right? And to share that love, to share those goals and dreams that I have in that bag at that end of the stick that I'm carrying along with me every single day, right? That is the mirroring back to me, that enthusiasm for why I'm doing what I am doing because it's just as big a part of my life as this is, right? Well, maybe this is this is a priority, right? You don't have to give me a reward for doing this. But I love that, right? And I would feel like I'm missing puzzle pieces out of my life if I didn't get to, right, experience the taste of my goals, my dreams, and those things that I want in my life, right? It's what keeps me going. It's what keeps me in that good cheer, right? And we all need, right, that motivation and inspiration and those little rewards in our life because that's what makes life worth living, right? We get one shot of this. Cindy's not coming back, right? And that one day I am going to be sitting in that rocking chair, all old and decrepit, and I'll have all those beautiful memories, right? To fall back on and entertain myself when all I can do is look at a tree in a backyard, right? Or maybe manage to walk to a park. That's the truth. Enthusiasm is a result of doing what you love, right? It keeps me going, it keeps me smiling. You guys, I appreciate that you guys all came in and hung out with me tonight. Uh, People go swimming or visit friends and family. We do here in Michigan too. People who live downstate in Michigan have cottages, and up north in Michigan The powerful word tonight on Friday night is enthusiasm, right? I'm grateful for my enthusiasm. I am, right? I wish more people were enthusiastic about their lives. But, they're sometimes chasing their own bags, right? With their own goals and their own dreams. And what makes me happy, what's important in my life, that abundance that right? The abundance of my good health, my abundance of my goals and dreams, the abundance of having my YouTube channel, the abundance to know how important it is to have that enthusiasm, right? Which comes directly from doing what I love to do. You guys have a great night. It's Friday night. I don't come online. Well, I am online, but I don't present online on Saturdays. And but I'm here on Sunday night with my other live show, Chatters Live. If you want to come out and hang out with us, and it's a good time. I have a great crew over there, and I'm grateful for my good crew here. I appreciate you, and yeah, I appreciate all of you. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me tonight. And we'll see you on Monday if we don't see you on Sunday.